Hello everybody, another video coming at you. So we're doing the next video in our sequence, talking about solving quadratic equations. This video will be about the quadratic formula. So again, you're going to want to make sure you have your paper that's been folded into 4 pieces, as well as the worksheet that you should have received in class about the quadratic formula. If you don't, you can print it on Canvas. All right, if you're ready, let's get started. I'll just go ahead and share my screen. All right, so I'm presenting these in the order that we did them in class. So the quadratic formula was actually the last one that we saw. So number 4 is the quadratic formula. There's kind of a lot of information to fit in this box, so do your best to write small. All right, the quadratic formula. Do you remember it? Are you singing this song in your head? If you don't remember it, I encourage you to go and watch the video of the song again. I know it's obnoxious, but you remember it. So, here it is. I'm going to sing it for you. X is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. See, it just helps you remember it so good. You should feel privileged I don't sing in front of very many people. Alrighty, so steps when solving using the quadratic formula. Step number 1 is to put the equation in standard form equal to 0. So what that will look like is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Step 2 is to identify A, B, and C. Step 3 is to plug into the quadratic formula. And step 4 is to simplify. So let's see how that's done with an example. The example we're going to use here is 2x squared minus x equals negative 7. All right, so step 1 is to set it equal to 0 and make sure it's in standard form. So we'll want to take our equation, and since it's not equal to 0, we'll need to add 7 to both sides. When we rewrite our equation, we'll need the thing that's squared first, the thing that's not squared second, and the constant last equal to 0. Now that we have that, we can go to step 2, which is to identify A, B, and C. A is the number in front of the x squared, so for this one it's 2. B is the number in front of the x, so for this one it's negative 1. And C is the constant, for this it's a positive 7. All right, step 3 is to plug it into the quadratic formula. So x equals negative b. When your number is negative, you'll change the sign so it'll become positive. Sorry, I wrote 1. We're plugging it in. This is negative 1, so negative b is going to be a positive 1, plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is negative 1 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 2, times c, which is 7. all divided by 2 times a, which is 2. And now that we have it in the quadratic formula, our last thing that we need to do is simplify. So step 4, x equals 1 plus or minus. We're going to start by simplifying the thing inside of the radical. So 1 squared is 1, plus or minus 4 times 2 is 8, times 7 is 56, negative 56. On the bottom, 2 times 2 is 4. Simplifying further, we get 1 plus or minus the square root of negative 55 divided by 4. Taking this one step further, when we have a square root inside of a radical, we can take it out and it turns into an I. So we'll have 1 plus or minus I times the square root of 55 all over 4. And then we need to check to see if we can simplify it at this point. If we can, this number, and this number will have a greatest common factor. The greatest common factor of those 3 numbers is 1, so this cannot simplify. If it's not 1, then you'll just divide each of those terms by the greatest common factor. So since we can't simplify any further, the square root of 55 doesn't get any smaller. So that is our final answer. And then the last thing that we'll want to make sure we have on our note sheet is what's called the discriminant. The discriminant is the part inside of the square root, which is b squared minus 4ac. If the discriminant is positive, that means there's 2 real solutions. If the discriminant equals 0, that means there's 1 real solution. And if it's negative, then there will be 2 imaginary solutions. All right, so let's move on to our worksheet and do a couple example problems. So for these first 3 problems, we need to find the discriminant, then state the number and type of solution. So we'll start by finding the discriminant. The discriminant, as we just stated, is b squared minus 4ac. But before we can plug anything into the discriminant, we need our equation in standard form equal to 0. So for this first one, we'll need to add 3 to both sides. So we get negative 2x squared minus 4x minus 2 equals 0. Now that it's in standard form, we can identify a, b, and c. A is going to be negative 2, b is negative 4, and c is negative 2. Once we have those numbers, we can go ahead and plug them into our discriminant formula. So b is negative 4, b squared minus 4 times a, which is negative 2, times c, which is negative 2. So we get 4 squared, which is 16. Subtract, well, maybe not subtract, negative 4 times negative 2 is positive 8, times negative 2 is negative 16. 16 minus 16 is 0. So that number right there represents our discriminant. After you plug it in and simplify, that's the discriminant. The second part of this says to state the number and type of solution. So the number says how many solutions are there going to be, and the type of solution, is it going to be imaginary or real? So the number, the discriminant is equal to 0, we have one solution, and it's going to be real. So one solution, that's real. That's all there is to it. So number 2, again, we got to start by getting it into standard form. So let's go ahead and move the 7 and the x to the other side. It doesn't matter what side you move it to. You can pick whatever side you want. And then just make sure you write it in standard form. So we've got the thing that's squared, x squared, the thing that's not squared, minus x, and the constant plus 9. These do in fact go to 0. So we're ready to go. A is equal to 8, B is equal to -1, C is equal to 9. Plugging those into our discriminant formula, b squared is going to be 8 squared minus 4. Oh, sorry, b is -1. My apologies. So b squared is going to be -1 squared minus 4 times a, which is 8, times c, which is 9. So this is going to become 1. And then this part negative, I'm going to do that on a calculator. -4 times 8 times 9 is -288, which is the same as -287. That number is our discriminant. Then we need to state the number and type of solutions. Because it's negative, there will be 2 solutions, and they will be imaginary. All right, one more of those. So this one's a little bit different, just because we don't have all 3 terms represented, but it's equal to 0, so we don't need to move anything to the other side. We just need to identify what is what. So the thing in front of the x squared is our a. So for this one, it's going to be 5. B, we don't have any b, right? There's 0 x's, so that means that b is 0. So if there's a term that's not represented, it's just going to be equal to 0. And then c is going to be equal to -2. So now we can go ahead and plug that in to our discriminant formula. So b squared minus 4ac. B is 0. Minus 4 times a, which is 5, times c, which is -2. 0. And 0 squared is 0. Then -4 times 5 is -20. Times -2 is a positive 40. So we get 40 as our discriminant. Then we need to state the number and type of solutions. Because it's positive, there will be 2 solutions, and they will be real. All right. So now we're going to move on to using the quadratic formula to solve. So for these next 2 examples, that's what we're going to do. So let's go ahead and follow those 4 steps that we outlined on our graphic organizer. So the first step is to put it in standard form equal to 0. So I'm going to move 11x to the other side and 4 to the other side. Putting this in standard form, I'll have 4x squared plus 11x plus 8 equals 0. Step 2 then is to identify a, b, and c. So a is 4, b is 11, and c is 8. Once we have those identified, we can plug them into our quadratic formula. So we'll have x equals -11 plus or minus the square root of 11 squared minus 4 times a, which is 4, times c, which is 8, all divided by 2 times a. And then once we've plugged it in, we're just going to simplify. So -11 remains the same. -11 remains the same. We'll have plus or minus the square root of 121. And then I'm going to do that on my calculator. I might not need to, but I'm going to. -4 times 4 times 8 is -128. all over 8. Simplifying further, we get negative 11 plus or minus the square root. 121 subtract 128 is negative 7 divided by 8. Now we can simplify our radical. When there's a negative inside of a radical, we put it on the outside and it becomes an I. So we'll have negative 11 plus or minus I times the square root of 7 divided by 8. The square root of 7 doesn't simplify. Those three numbers don't have a greatest common factor other than 1. So that is our final solution. All right, one more example for this video. So first thing we got to do is get it in standard form, equal to 0. So we'll move the 5 to the other side. So you have 9x squared minus 18x minus 100 equals 0. Now we can find a, b, and c. A will be 9, b is negative 18, and c is negative 100. Plugging those into our quadratic formula, we get x equals negative b, which is going to be 18, plus or minus the square root of b squared, or negative 18 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 9, times c, which is negative 100, all divided by 2 times a, which is 9. So simplifying this, we get 18 plus or minus the square root of negative 18 squared, which is 324. And then we'll do negative 4 times 9 times negative 100. We get positive 3,600. All divided by 2 times 9, which is 18. Those are some big numbers, but you guys can totally do it. So we'll get 18 plus or minus 324 plus 3,600 is going to give us the square root of 3,924, all divided by 18. All right, once we get to this point, we got to see if our radical is going to simplify, which it is. I'll help you with the factors for this one since it's so big. It's going to be 36 and 109. 109 isn't going to break down, but 36 we can break down into 6 and 6. We could break that down further, but we're just looking for groups of two things. So we could also stop here and say those are a group of two things, and our 109 is what's left over. So we'll get 18 plus or minus 6, since we pull out one representative for the group of two, times the square root of 109 divided by 18. So we know that our square root doesn't simplify, but we can check to see if those three numbers have greatest common factor. 18, 6, and 18. The greatest common factor of those is 6. So we can just go ahead and divide each of them by 6. 18 divided by 6 is 3. 6 divided by 6 is 1, which we don't need to write, so we can just write the square root of 109. And then 18 divided by 6 is 3. Now that we've simplified all the way, we know that our solution to this quadratic equation is 3 plus or minus the square root of 109 over 3. So that's all the examples for this video. The rest you can do on your own. 6, 7, 8, and 9 are about finding the discriminant. 10, 11, 12, and 13 are on the back of your paper, and they're about solving using the quadratic formula. I do want to point out one thing. On some of the papers that I printed, this answer was wrong. So just go ahead and check and make sure that the answer to 13 is this. X equals 0 and 8 over 7. That is the correct solution to number 13. So go ahead and give those a shot. If you have any questions, please let me know, because I would be happy to help.